Hi, I'm Alex,
Hi, I'm Annie.
and welcome to the Research Room, a space to
Welcome.
make research by the people for the people. Perfect synergy. Today we have Liz. She's back. She has not left us, but she's
No.
not being the host today, which is a change of pace. We are going to continue on with some of our health stuff, and Liz will go ahead and talk about this paper called Attachment in Donor-Conceived Adults, Curiosity, Search, and Contact. So please, Liz, go ahead, tell us a little bit about why is this important?
Yeah, so the whole purpose of this paper was to understand can we use attachment, right? And attachment is how people approach their close relationships. So we're trying to see can we actually use attachment to understand donor conception? Now you probably don't know what donor conception is, so I should probably mention what that is. So it's people who are born through assisted reproduction. So kind of think like an egg or a sperm donor, and the family types can really differ, right? Throughout different types of families, different couples, but generally it's the case that you have the donor conceived person has a biological parent, so it's somebody who's related to the donor conceived person, and then there's a non-biological, sometimes called a social parent, although that's a horrendous term. We should not use that, although I use it in the paper. And that person is not related to the donor conceived person, but obviously they're involved in the upbringing of the child. And then you have the donor. So the donor may be a part of the child's life or they may not be. So yeah, what we're doing in the study is just trying to see does people's attachment relate to their curiosity about their donor conception? And does it relate to whether or not people are attempting to find their donor or contact that person?
Got it. Cool. Okay. So yeah, seems pretty important, right? For many
Yeah.
reasons. Um, I do want to just make sure, I guess, before I misspeak. So what would be the best term to use to make sure I'm being inclusive with this?
Yeah, I would call it the non-biological parent. I don't know. I use
Okay.
social parent in the paper, and now I really wish I would have never used that term. So yeah, I would say
Mm,
non-biological parent's the way to go.
okay. So we have biological, we have non-biological, and we have donor,
Hmm.
right? Okay. Awesome. Cool. Okay. So then, what did you find?
Yeah. I didn't even mention what the findings are.
Right.
So we found that people who are anxious with respect to their attachment style. So these tend to be people who are preoccupied with relationships. They tend to focus on them more so than people who are not anxious. We found that they are more curious about their donor conception, but at the same time, it's really weird. They're actually more disengaged from it. But they're also not likely to search for their donor or establish contact with this person. So it's kind of weird because, they're curious about who they are, curious about the donor, but at the same time, they're not searching for this person and trying to contact them.
Cool. Okay, so let me unpack a few things here. So, with attachment, is this all the same attachment that we've been talking about? Anytime that your name comes up, attachment also comes up.
It does.
Is this the
I'm an
same?
attachment person.
Yes, you are the expert. That's why we want to keep talking to you about attachment. So, is this the same attachment that, what we were talking about a couple weeks ago? Can we consider it the same kind of thing?
Yeah, more or less. I mean, so it's the same in terms of the definition and stuff. We
Hmm.
are measuring it the same way, right? But it's we're looking at it with respect to all the parents, right? So instead
Hmm.
of asking for your attachment with your romantic partner, right, we're asking people the same questions, but it's for each of the parents. So they fill out the questions for their bio parent, their non-bio parent, and the donor if they actually know who that person is.
Got it. Okay. So yeah, we can see a mix of things. And I guess unlike the other paper, where people that are higher in attachment anxiety, they ended up not doing as well as far as their satisfaction. Um, here, I mean, there seems like there is a positive spin to things. Like being curious is good, I think, right?
It is, yeah, I would say so.
Yeah. um, but then it ends up maybe like too many questions arise, and like you kind of stop yourself, which is not necessarily the place that you might want to be, especially if like you are curious. Like that back and forth, that push and pull of like, oh, I want to know, but like, oh, I'm scared to know.
Yeah.
Um,
And we don't know
do you?
really about that because like the results can't speak, right? We didn't ask people specific questions about like, well, why aren't you contacting this person? Like, are you afraid? We're not asking those specific questions. So like I can only assume, right, and guess based on these results that like they're curious and they want to approach this person, but like maybe they're I don't know, proactively thinking like, oh, I'm afraid, right? Or maybe I'm going to come across as like too needy or like too much for this person.
Mhm.
So maybe they're thinking
I
about
feel
those
like that,
things. Yeah.
yeah, and I feel like the results itself kind of reflects like what, anxious attached people would normally do, right? Like they're curious, but then they're also like scared that they might get rejected, or these kind of like mix of like approach and both avoidance kind of like style. So
Yeah.
yeah, maybe that could be why.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that that makes a lot of sense. I I guess I do wonder though, like, can't you just do a follow-up study? Because I'm curious
I
about
mean,
like,
grad school's almost over for me, so I could.
um, this idea of push and pull. Like, I also wonder like if that has to deal with their like who they're seen as a person, right? So like they're curious like that. That's it's that like engaging like approach sort of factor, which is great, but then they are worried that like, oh, I want to say partner, that's not the right word,
Donor.
whoever, yes, a donor.
Different person.
Yeah, very different person. I hope, oh, that is
Oh
not
wow, this is like this
nope,
could
I'm
go
not.
really wrong.
Nope.
Okay.
I just imagined it like
Yeah.
I should
Yep.
stop.
Let's continue.
Yeah.
Yep. So with their donor, they might wonder like, if I reach out, like, will they like me? Like things like that, right? Like that kind
Yeah.
of like anxiety. So like, I wonder what could help that. Like, is it a better sense of identity? Is it something that like maybe they just need to feel more secure with that person, like get to know them, get to like talk to them. But like, how do you ever do that? Like, there's so many things that
Yeah.
happen there. What do you think?
So kind of getting at your first part of the question, like some people are probably more likely to like want that information, right? Maybe not even curiosity, but just like medical like information.
Mm,
So a lot of times, right? Like people aren't thinking, oh, people probably take their genetic relationships, right, with their parents for granted. You're like, oh yeah, I'm related to my parents, but like there's so many things that come with that, like knowing your medical history and people who are donor conceived, like they don't know that information or they may not have it. So I feel like even if they're not curious, maybe they're searching for like some kind of information.
mm,
So there's that factor.
yeah. Annie, go ahead.
Yeah, and also one thing I wondered was that, so in your sample, there are some proportion of people who were told from their parents that they are donor conceived, and some that they found out somehow by themselves, and some others. And I'm not sure if your paid findings can directly speak to this question, but do you think there's like a right time or right method in which like parents can tell their offspring that they are donor conceived? And do you think that there's a possibility that attachment styles can also affect this right timing? What do you think, Liz?
That's a great question. So there's like this whole debate like in the field about when should you even tell your child that they're donor conceived? And some people are like, "Oh no, we shouldn't tell them at all. Like that's going to create chaos and like problems in the family, so just don't tell them." But the literature says like, I don't know, it's probably good to tell, your child this. It's a big factor. It's something important that they should know. And you really don't want them to like find out through like DNA testing, right? Or like somebody in the family maybe like knows the secret, and then they're like, by the way, you know, I don't know if you know this about yourself, but you're donor conceived. So I feel like there's like the potential to create a lot of problems.
Yeah.
So like there's been a lot of research on this, and like basically it shows that like the earlier is the better. Like you should disclose this information, and usually it's like as soon as the kid can understand like what it all means.
Yeah, and also this kinds of list leads to my other question about, so it could be that people, are there any differences between the processes that donor conceived adults go through compared to people who are adopted, right? Like in some sense it's both could create some identity crisis, and like where do I belong, who are my real parents, these questions could be something that could similar across different situations, but then I don't have enough knowledge to answer this, so I wanted to see what you think of it.
That's a great question. So I feel like that's a question I always get with this research is like, well, isn't this adoption? It's very similar, right? In like a lot of ways, like there are parallels, but it's kind of different in the sense of like the purpose behind it, right? So like with adoption, like the parents are missing, right? In the sense of like they're missing, but like you can potentially know information about them. In this type of situation, you may never get the information. And it's almost like adoption is trying to like mend a wound, like essentially, like you're trying to give the child a better life. Not in all cases. I don't want to generalize, but usually that tends to be the case. Whereas in this situation, like it's more so like about the parents. And like the parents are almost in effect like creating like a wound like for the child where they may not know like where they come from. So
yeah, that's a really good point, and very useful for anyone who mixes them two up.
Yeah, but there are similarities though, for sure.
Yeah.
So that actually, that question that Annie just asked, that makes me think like, do you have any idea about like in general, those that are donor conceived? Like, is there a difference in attachment styles, like just in general? Like, do they tend to be more avoidant? Do they tend to be more anxious? Do they tend to be more secure, like compared to the rest of the world?
So I would imagine like when I first started off this like doing this research, that was what I originally thought. I was like, oh, I would imagine there might be more insecurity, right, in terms of the sample. But interestingly, I actually found like the rates are pretty comparable to what we usually see with like any attachment research. So usually it's like split, not totally 50-50, but it's pretty comparable where it's like 50% secure, 50% insecure. So it seems to be pretty similar. But again, this is just this one study, so who knows?
I was also surprised, though, by your finding that donor-conceived adults feel more, I may be wrong, but correct me if I am, but like feel more attached to their biological parent compared to non-biological parent, right?
Yeah.
And I was wondering why this is the case. Like, is it the way that, these two parents like treated them while they were growing up, or is it like a post-hoc explanation after finding out that they're donor conceived, they somehow, like attribute like different characteristics to their biological compared to non-biological parent? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, that finding was really interesting, like looking at differences between the parents and like, their attachment. The problem though is like I'm very hesitant to like say anything and like draw conclusions because just by virtue of the sample. So like how it worked is that it's primarily people from heterosexual families, right? So what happens is like the parental sex, there's like confounding going on. So like, in other words, like people are more likely to have like their mother is the biological parent. And then the father is this like the social, I shouldn't use that term, non-biological parent. Yeah. So we really can't answer that. It could just be that they're more secure, right, with their mother. I mean, we find that in a lot of attachment research. So we don't know is basically the answer.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to formulate. I'm trying to formulate my question because there's something else I want to ask that's very much along those lines. Just like thinking about I don't know how to say this.
Questions are hard. I mean,
So would it be possible to like think about if dang it, I can see it in my head. Like if I could just write, maybe if I could write an equation out, that
let
would
me
be
try to
so much
get
more
in your
helpful.
head so I can like understand the question. Okay, let's try this.
Yeah. So dang it, I can't verbalize this. Um, so biological parents, there, and I think maybe also with non-biological parents, if you could have a secure relationship or attachment style with both of them,
Yep,
do you think that would aid in the process of like curiosity and search for their donor parent? So like having that
definitely.
security elsewhere.
Yeah, I
Oh,
definitely
sorry,
think
go
so
ahead.
because no, that's a great question because I feel like that's half the problem. So people are probably reluctant to search out the donor because they don't want to upset, right, the non-biological
Mm,
parent, right? Like that's your parent, that person like helped raise you. So you might feel like, oh, I'm being ungrateful if I try to like
mm,
search for the donor, right? So yeah, I think that if you're secure with like both of those parents, that would like aid in helping with the search because I don't know, you know that no matter what happens, right? Say the donor welcomes you with open arms, that's awesome. Now you have a bigger family, or maybe they were like, leave me alone. I never want to talk to you. But then
mm,
No.
you have a safe haven, like you have people that you can go to for support. So
Mhm.
I definitely think that that
mm.
would be beneficial.
Hmm. So maybe sort of like going along those lines. So, oh, hmm. No, never mind. Because I was going to ask, like, why would that not be the case for like avoidant? Like, if you, well, what happened with people that are more avoidant? I guess
What
I can't
happened?
even remember
Nothing.
what even happened in this study.
In this study,
Yeah.
there was
Uh,
no relationship. So people who
so
are
was
more
it
avoidant, there was no relationship with
Mm.
contact behavior, searching behavior, anything like that.
right? So I'm wondering, like, is it that for people that are higher in avoidance, like, is it is it that like some people really want to search and don't or something, or like is it that they really just like don't even care, like they're not even curious, like in general, like is there like a moderating factor that like you can also split up of people that with avoidant attachment like further so that you could find something, but I don't know if that makes sense in somebody else's head. That's not mine.
That makes sense. I would
Mhm.
imagine that it's not that they're not curious. It's just that, I mean, this is just like me going with the flow here. So I would imagine that because they have a history of like having people who aren't really there for them, like they're like, oh, if I reach out to the donor, I'm just going to have the same pattern that I've observed like with my own parents, right? And like other people in my life. So that's probably maybe the hesitation. Like they're afraid to reach out because they're like, oh, I have crappy relationships and this is just going to be crappy too. Something like
Mm,
that.
yeah, and then I guess like there probably is like another group within people that are more avoidantly attached that like they just don't care. Like they it
Yeah.
doesn't matter to them either way, so like they just end up doing it. So like that's maybe why you don't see that finding, that like it's not so clear, and like it's not that clear of a pattern. Either you don't care or like you're not invested or whatever, right? Like
Right.
um yeah, it could go a lot of different ways. I am actually like pretty curious. Not to say for personal reasons. Maybe who's to say if I'm avoidantly attached? But
Maybe, possibly. No, but that's
I
a
don't know.
great point, though. Like, I really feel like that's my next study, if I do one, could be looking at that, like looking at the
Mm.
different attachment styles, but like splitting avoidant attachment to see, like, does that differentially predict, these outcomes?
Mhm. Or maybe it'll happen in a book deal, but who knows?
Maybe. We'll see. It's too early to tell.
Annie, do you have other things on your mind right now?
Yeah, one other thing that that came to my mind when I was reading your paper was, So in your sample, it seems like that, these people who participated in your research are those ones who did took interest, right?
Yeah.
And I've noticed that the sample is consist of mostly females and less males. And I was wondering, does that reflect like gender differences and like how much people care, about knowing their status and reaching out to donors? So what do you
Yeah.
think?
So there isn't in like the work that I've like read and stuff and like, I'm familiar with there, it doesn't seem to be that there's like differences with respect to gender of like women are intrinsically like more curious about these things. But I do think that's a limitation of this research. So I don't want people thinking, oh, everyone, this is a pattern for everyone with this like attachment style, because it is limited by that fact. But yeah, I do wonder if there could be differences with respect to that. Like, are women
Yeah.
more likely to do this? I don't know. It's an open question.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing, maybe this could be my last, but is that so because I come from collectivistic culture, like it makes me wonder like what would happen if the same study was run with donor conceived adults somewhere in like China, somewhere in like Korea, where, like people have, people tend to define themselves as being more of a continuation of their parents, particularly in these like collectivistic cultures. So, do you think that in these cultures, like people are less reluctant to, know more about their real, biological, like ancestors, or like even if like how they deal with these with the news that they could be donor conceived, like how do you think that these will all play out in different cultures?
I think that's such a fascinating question because I've been thinking about that since the beginning of doing this research. Like, there has to be like cross-cultural differences, with respect to these things. Because I would imagine, like, in a collectivistic culture, right, the family unit is so important, right? Like, you want to keep the peace, like, have like harmonious relationships. So I would imagine, and again, I don't know if this is true, I would imagine that people are like less likely to even talk about these things. Like, it's a very taboo topic in general, but I would imagine like there's lower disclosure rates. Like, people are not disclosing this to their children as much as like, non-collectivistic cultures. And I would also imagine like the donor conceived kids are not really like searching as much because they're afraid of like upsetting, the non-biological parent and their biological parent that they grew up with. So
even if the fear of other people finding out, right? Because it is a taboo, it could be a taboo. Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I mean, I asked it and I said,
no, it's so
it's
cool.
A very interesting question.
It is. I agree. I agree.
No, I was going to say I would be really interested in finding out like the cross-cultural differences.
Yeah, I just have to become a cross-cultural researcher now and like study this from every country.
Yeah, that would be so exciting.
Yeah. If anybody studies attachment out there and you want to like collaborate, okay.
Here I am.
I guess I wonder, like, so the idea of like keeping secrets, I feel like that happens a lot more in collectivistic cultures.
Yeah, for sure.
So I do wonder, like, in general, would children even know that they were donor conceived? And yeah, exactly what you two were saying. Like, there's so much more stigma probably against that. It's a taboo topic. Like, why would your parent like leave you, or like why would your parent like not actually parent you, or like things like that, or like why aren't you able to have a child? Like, as if it's their problem actually. Like,
right.
All of that. That adds so many things into the mix.
Well, I'm even wondering too, like if they find out like inadvertently through like a 23andMe or something, like maybe they're less likely to even confront their parents because they're like, oh, I don't want to disrupt the peace, but like this is a big thing. I don't know.
I mean, I think this generation is a little bit different. I think they would disturb the peace.
Potentially. Yeah.
Yeah.
Annie's a peace disturber.
Yeah, I'm one of those.
All right. Cool. So yeah, I mean a lot of good stuff here. But what do you want to end? What's that
Mm.
final word that you want the public to know, Liz?
Wow. What do I even say? I would have just imagined that, like, I don't know, it's important to talk about like disclosure. I feel like especially with this. So if you're donor conceived out there, or like you have donor conceived kids, maybe you should tell them. Um, that might be beneficial. But I just think that it's important to talk about these things just because like it is taboo still. And a lot of people don't even know what donor conception is. So yeah,
Mhm.
that's
So why we need
basically it.
you.
Yeah.
And we need someone rich to just publish a book from you, and we'll all be set.
We need a book.
But
That's
this is
it.
really important.
It
It
is.
was really interesting. Yeah.
Well, thank
Yeah, I
you.
mean, it's important for so many reasons. No, I'm not going to go on a laundry list of why this is important. Like, I
I
want
could
to,
do
but
that. I could be like A
uh,
through Z, all the reasons.
yeah. Awesome. Okay, cool. Thank you for all of your knowledge on this. I think a lot of people will be interested to hear this.
Well, thank you for
Um,
having me on the show.
Thank you for coming.
So then, as far as other stuff that we're doing, what's on the radar? We're going to be keeping with this health topic, right? We want to talk. We want to bring it back to COVID. Actually, maybe you haven't heard enough about it, but it's an important topic these days, I think. Um, so yeah, I mean, potentially, like, what are mischaracterizations of how COVID is spread and how that might have fallout on a whole bunch of other behaviors, right? So we want to talk about that next week. No, not next week. Yes, next week. Yeah,
I think
next week.
it's next week. Yeah.
Is it next week?
Yes, it
Yes.
is.
Yeah. Sorry about
Yes,
this.
by
Yeah.
the time this airs next week. Cool. So we'll be talking about that again. We have tons of stuff happening in the research room, and like new stuff too. With the help of Liz and Annie, we are just creating more and more new ways to present this information. So let us know what you like, what you don't like. Check us out on our website, roomforresearch.com, or also on social media, everywhere, all the social medias at Room for Research. And I guess until next time, thank you, and see you later. Bye.
Bye.
With the sun breeze.